celebrating Madeline Albright. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good morning, and we're coming on the air as this country pays its final respects to a towering figure in U.S. diplomacy. The funeral for former Secretary of State Madeline Albright is now underway at Washington National Cathedral. She was the first woman to ever hold the post. She died of cancer last month at the age of 84. In just a few moments, we will hear from President Biden, who has already described Albright as a force, saying hers were the hands that turned the tide of history. There is an extraordinary showing of dignitaries in the cathedral today from across the U.S., around the world. Joining President Biden are former President Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama. You see there former President Bill Clinton, who of course chose Albright, first as his ambassador to the UN, then as his Secretary of State. She was unanimously confirmed by the Senate, the first woman to hold the post. You saw former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton there in the front row, close friends with Albright, her daughter Chelsea, talking with Vice President Al Gore before the funeral began. Both former President and Secretary Clinton will be speaking this morning as well. Members of Congress, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, in attendance. You can see him right there in the center of your screen. Foreign ministers and ambassadors, past and present. Former top U.S. diplomats John Kerry and Condoleezza Rice, of course, the second woman to serve as Secretary of State and who was a student under Albright's father. Albright took the oath of office in 1997. Secretary Albright, a native of Prague, came to America as a refugee. She and her family fled the Nazis and then Soviet-dominated Eastern Europe. In fact, she once told Barbara Walters that she wanted the American people to understand foreign policy is domestic policy and that there is no line between them. Ever the diplomat, just 1 month before her death, she wrote in the New York Times that Vladimir Putin is making an historic mistake, saying Ukraine is entitled to its sovereignty no matter who its neighbors happen to be. If Mr. Putin feels backed into a corner, he has only himself to blame, she wrote. She was the first senior U.S. official to meet Putin as acting president of Russia 22 years ago. President Biden now walking up. He will be remembering the former Secretary of State. And let's listen to the president at the National Cathedral.
Freedom endures against all odds in the face of every aggressor, because there are always those who will fight for that freedom. And in the 20th and 21st century, freedom had no greater champion than Madeline Albright. Anne, Alice, Katie, your mom was a force of nature. With her goodness and grace, her humanity, and her intellect, she turned the tide of history. David, Daniel, Jack, Jake, Ben, and Ellie, you're too young to remember this, but when the Iron Curtain fell and the Berlin Wall came down, our world faced one of those inflection points, once-in-a-generation moment of upheaval, but opportunity as well. People and nations around the world were deciding the future they wanted to make for themselves. And your grandmother, as a Madam Ambassador and as the first female Secretary of State in American history, made sure those nations and those people knew exactly where the United States of America stood and what we stood for. You know, and all through it, her beloved sister Kathy and her brother John can attest, she never forgot where she came from or who she was. President Obama, President Secretary Clinton, Vice President Al Gore, members of Congress, cabinet members, past and present. Today, we honor a truly proud American who made all of us prouder to be Americans. I also want to welcome the distinguished guests and dignitaries who've traveled from around the world to celebrate a daughter of the Czech Republic who knew what it meant to endure war and flee persecution. With her friend, Václav Havel, when he died, I remember when Madeline eulogized him, she used these words, and I quote, "He cast light into places of deepest darkness and reminded us constantly of our obligations to one another." These words apply equally to Madeline. When I got word that Madeline had passed, I was in midair on my way to Europe to meet with our NATO allies in Brussels to help try to continue to keep the strong alliances together. Our organization and the international response to Russia's brutal and unjustifiable war against Ukraine. It was not lost on me that Madeline was a big part of the reason NATO was still strong and galvanized as it is today. And a few days later, I traveled to Poland and spoke about all that was at stake in our world and for democracy and freedom, which is under assault from forces of autocracy and oppression. Many are tired of hearing me say, I think we're at another inflection point in world history, where there is literally a severe confrontation between autocrats and democratic nations. President Clinton, Bill, it was not lost on me that you spoke at the same Warsaw Castle that I was about to speak at 25 years earlier. In my case, it was evening. The interior of the castle, that beautiful courtyard, holds about 500-600 people. And mostly Poles and Ukrainians were present when I spoke. And I'm sure many in the audience spoke English, though likely not their first language. But when I mentioned the name, they were respectful of what I was saying. But when I mentioned the name of Madeline Albright, there was a deafening cheer. They all stopped everything and started to cheer. It was spontaneous. It was real. For her name is still synonymous with America as a force for good in the world. Madeline never minced words or wasted time when she saw something needed fixing or someone who needed helping. She just got to work. And as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee from the time I was a kid, God, they were the good old days. I was the chairman or the ranking member for a good part of that time. And in the 90s, I can attest that Madeline, with the significant help of the President of the United States, kept the committee really busy. And our work to halt genocide in the Balkans, support new democracies in Eastern and Central Europe, to develop Plan Colombia, and all those undertakings, Madeline was an incomparable ally and advisor beyond the President to me and to others in the committee. She always had a knack for explaining to the American people why it mattered to them that people everywhere in the world were struggling to breathe free. And Madeline didn't stop when she left government. For decades, she was a nexus with the foreign policy community, always and I mean always, on top of the latest developments, always speaking out for democracy, and always the first to sound the alarm about fascism. Presidents and leaders around the world continue to solicit her advice, including me. When I asked her last year to chair the Defense Policy Board, she built businesses. She pumped out New York Times bestsellers that were both highly prescient and deeply salient, and constantly bestsellers. I think I've read them all. You know, and she mentored generations of rising foreign policy experts, the quote, foreign policy establishment. You know, and the thing that I noted that was deliberate and remarkable about her, not unlike Secretary Clinton, was that she made sure that young women knew they belonged at every single table having to do with national security, without exception. Today, across our government and around the world, Madeline's protégés are legion. Many are here today, each carrying with them a spark lit by her passion and her brilliance. I think part of the reason why Madeline was such a successful diplomat was that she understood something I've always believed, and my boss, President Obama, when I was vice president, used to kid me because I repeat so often. Because I believed she understood something I've always believed, that all politics, especially international politics, is personal. And all ultimately is personal. She could go toe-to-toe with the toughest dictators, then turn around and literally teach a fellow ambassador how to do the Macarena on the floor of the UN Security Council. You all think I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. She thought it was too difficult to teach me how to dance, though. She was right. No matter where she was, she understood people. She cared about people. And all of that was grounded in an education gained by watching her father, Joseph Corbel, and her mentor as well. She learned diplomacy at the dinner table. And throughout her life, nothing mattered to Madeline more than the family. Nothing. Madeline had the same role that I do and others here do. No matter what's happening in my day, as President Obama can tell you, or who I'm meeting with, if one of my children calls, I take the call. She was the same way. Ann, Alice, Katie, and your grandchildren, each of you is literally a tribute to her enormous capacity to love. I know it's hard, but I promise you, she's always with you, in your mind, in your heart, and part of your soul. And I promise you, you're going to have a tough decision. You're going to be asking yourself, what would she want me to do? Not a joke. Remember, I said it. That's going to happen. And Kathy and John, the connection the three of you maintained through your lives was always an anchor to Madeline through all the ups and downs of life. What a gift. What a gift. What a family. You know, from that first transatlantic crossing on the SS America to landing in nations around the world in that big blue and white plane emblazoned with the words United States of America, Madeline understood her story was America's story. Her story was America's story. She loved to speak about America as the indispensable nation. To her, the phrase was never a statement of arrogance. It was about gratitude for all this country made possible for her. It was a testament to her belief in the endless possibilities that only America could help unlock around the world, and her true understanding of what America power could achieve when it was united with and motivated by enduring American values. That's why there was nothing she loved more than swearing in new citizens to this great nation of ours. She'd light up, reminding them that she once stood where they stood. Having gained the blessings of liberty, she wanted nothing more than to share them around the globe. To Madeline, from my perspective, there was no higher mission, no greater honor than to serve this great experiment in freedom known as the United States of America. May her memory continue to be a blessing to our nation, and may we remember her words and her deeds. May she always be a light to all those in the darkest places, a reminder of our obligation to one another. May God bless Madeline Albright.
President Biden honoring former Secretary of State Madeline Albright, the first woman to hold that position, in the funeral at Washington National Cathedral, now underway. He told her children, "Your mother was a force." He reminded her grandchildren of the history that their grandmother made and said she always was not afraid to let the rest of the world know exactly where America stood. She never minced words when something needed fixing or someone needed helping. And he said she was always the first to sound the alarm on fascism. Our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, outside the cathedral. And John, you don't need me to tell you, in these divided times, to see this display of unity between both parties speaks volumes about the respect for Madeline Albright.
Well, as you said, David, a towering figure in American politics, in American foreign policy, somebody, when you think about it, confirmed Secretary of State by a vote of, I think it was 99-0, respected across the board. And you see it in the room, not just the former Democratic presidents there, Clinton and Obama, of course, President Biden giving that eulogy, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, but also Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate. And I think notable, one of the people that will be doing a reading in this service is Condoleezza Rice, who was the second woman to be Secretary of State. And in an extraordinary coincidence of American politics, Condoleezza Rice counts Madeline Albright's father not just as somebody who was a teacher, not just a professor that she had, but one of the great influences on her life outside of her parents. Somebody who, as a student, she thought she would study music, and it was because of Joseph Corbell, Madeline Albright's father, that Condoleezza Rice, the second woman to become Secretary of State, would go on and study foreign policy and be in a path that would bring her to the State Department.
Yeah, just an extraordinary connection. John, our thanks to you. Martha Raddatz also watching with me here this morning, our Chief Global Affairs anchor. And Martha, you covered the State Department for so many years, and of course, you covered the history she made as the first woman Secretary of State. And ever the diplomat, she spoke out right until the end.
She did in an op-ed piece just a few months ago, David. She warned what would happen in Ukraine. She talked about Vladimir Putin and having met him in the year 2000. And she said, flying home, I recorded my impressions. Putin is small and pale, so cold as to almost be reptilian. She did warn about the consequences of war and also predicted that there would be determined Ukrainian resistance. And David, I want to say a little bit about Madeline Albright. as the first female Secretary of State. She was an example. She did not go into that job looking at it as trying to be like a man. She brought her compassion. She brought her experience as a mother. And she brought those brooches. She sent a diplomatic message with those brooches. She once wore a bug pin around Russians because she was unhappy that the Russians had bugged a room at the State Department. And Iraqis once called her a serpent, and she wore a snake brooch. That's who Madeline Albright was. She was such an example and had such gravitas in the foreign policy and national security world. That is a man's world, and she broke that barrier. Just look around that cathedral today. David?
No question about that, Martha. And as the president just said, she didn't mince words. And as you point out, she wasn't shying away from symbolism with her pins as well. We took note that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton arrived at the funeral today wearing a pin, no doubt in honor of her dear friend, Madeline Albright. Secretary Clinton will be speaking along with former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, who has that connection to the Albright family, to Madeline Albright's father, in fact, in the world of music. She learned from Madeline Albright's father, and it will be extraordinary to watch this play out over the course of the morning. Our coverage is going to continue on ABC News Live, abcnews.com, and of course, I'll be back with the entire team, as always, for World News Tonight. We'll pay tribute a bit later as well. I'm David Muir in New York. We'll see you later today. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.